This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Hannam.
And I'm Jamal Dajani.
Jamal, the genocide in Palestine, specifically in Gaza right now, is going on to its 43rd day, unabated, despite claims that the United States, Israel, and Hamas have reached a tentative deal for a ceasefire. The reality on the ground is that over 11,000 Palestinians have been killed, over 4,500 children have been killed. There are 1 million internally displaced Palestinians still. There is malnutrition and infectious disease outbreaks throughout the Gaza Strip right now. And only in the last 3 or 4 days, maybe a couple of hundred liters of fuel has been let in. Neonatal premature babies in Shifa Hospital are dying as we speak, Jamal. And Shifa Hospital is essentially closed down. The Israeli military is inside, as we speak now, inside Shifa Hospital, destroying whatever infrastructure is left there. And I think it's important, and we'll talk about it today, after 4 or 5 days destroying Shifa Hospital, there is no evidence of the Hamas so-called command center. So this big lie, which we're going to talk about later, is central to what's going on right now. But before we get to that, you did an excellent interview with Richard Silverstein, who's the editor of Tikkun Olam blog, and he's going to discuss with you Israel's inability to control the narrative despite embedding journalists within the Israeli military. It's a really great lobby. He's going to talk about harassment and doxing of college students and just what's happening globally right now with the genocide in Gaza.
That's right, Jess. So let's listen to Richard Silverstein. We are now entering the 7th week of Israel's bombing onslaught of Gaza. Israel has killed over 12,000 people, 5,000 of whom are children and 3,300 women. Israel's attack on Al-Shifa Hospital uncovered no Hamas command center, and Al-Shifa Hospital administrators say 40 patients, including 4 premature babies, died at the medical facility since last weekend due to power outages. International public outcry against Israel's onslaught continues to grow as Israel's justifications have lost all credibility. Unable to claim the narrative, Israel's defenders are now working to suppress all dissent. They are doubling down on muzzling all speech critical of Israel on campuses, social media, platforms, and public assembly. Joining us to discuss this and more is Richard Silverstein. He authors the Tikkun Olam blog, which is devoted to exposing the human rights abuses committed by the Israeli National Security State. His work has appeared in Haaretz, The Forward, the Seattle Times, the Los Angeles Times, and other publications. Welcome back to Arab Talk, Richard.
Thank you, Jamal. Great to be with you.
So Israel's carnage at Al-Shifa Hospital turned up no Hamas command center. Even embedded journalists from CNN, the New York Times, BBC would not corroborate Israel's claims. A BBC reporter pointed out numerous incidents of tampering and inconsistencies in Israel's video footage. Israel's propaganda is a shape-shifting sequence of lies that the public is no longer persuaded by. Is defending Israel becoming a liability for some mainstream news organizations?
Well, I think the problem that the news organizations face is that Israel has prohibited any media, any reporters from entering Gaza. So the only media is from stringers, Gaza stringers themselves, and they're mostly photographers documenting the carnage that has happened there. So we're getting a skewed pro-Israel media coverage. And I might add that the New York Times, several journalists who work for the New York Times Magazine were fired because they signed a statement opposing what the U.S. is doing in Gaza. The poetry editor of the New York Times Magazine resigned because she didn't want to be part of this kind of overstepping of the bounds of free speech by the management of the New York Times. So the other problem that we have is that the only way in which reporters from outside can get into Gaza is by embedding with the IDF. And when you embed with the IDF and you don't have any reporting from the other side, you're going to get, again, a totally skewed view media-wise of what's going on. So what really is more miraculous is that despite all of this, Israel still is on the defensive, and it still, as you said, has not been able to prove the contentions of the IDF regarding al-Shifa and other issues. So I think the entire IDF narrative that's being presented has to be treated with great skepticism.
Another example of Israel's backpedaling on lies is none other than Mark Regev himself, readjusting the fatalities of Israelis killed by Hamas because burned bodies were unrecognizable. This is an admission that Israel fired indiscriminately at both Hamas and its own citizens, which was reported, by the way, by some of the survivors. Only Israel has arms capable also of burning bodies to this extent. What have you been watching or reading in the Israeli media about this subject?
Well, two or three Israeli survivors of that attack by Hamas on 10/7 have indicated with eyewitness testimony that the IDF commanders on the scene actually directed fire at buildings which contained the Hamas fighters, but also contained Israeli citizens. And they did so deliberately knowing that they would be killing some of their own citizens. And there's an important IDF directive called the Hannibal Directive. And it says that in order to prevent Israelis from becoming hostages to Hamas, and thereby allowing Hamas to use them as bargaining chips to release Palestinian prisoners, that it's permitted for Israeli forces to kill either their own soldiers who are to be kidnapped or their own citizens. And in this case, I don't think that the IDF knew whether they would be hostages or not, but they just felt they had to get rid of the Hamas fighters and they were willing to sacrifice their own citizens. This was covered in 2 or 3 different media interviews. However, the government has deliberately not discussed this, and no autopsies have been done on the Israelis who were killed to determine which ones were killed by the IDF. And this is just another example of trying to cover up the narrative and trying to eliminate anything that would reflect badly on the IDF.
Well, let's come back here to the demonstrations right here in the United States. Pro-Palestinian support is on the rise internationally. And of course, when we talk about the United States, we'll also talk about the entire Western world and internationally. We're seeing demonstration numbers of hundreds of thousands. It's a broad-based grassroots movements. Increasing numbers of anti-Zionist Jews are playing an important role. They've always been present, but do you think that the war on Gaza has increased this number substantially?
Well, I do think so. I think that the Pew Trust surveys of American Jewish opinion show that support is being peeled away gradually without even this attack, this heinous, what I call a genocide against the people in Gaza. And so we're peeling away support among American Jews. And I think that that's even more exacerbated now with what's going on in Gaza. I think gradually there is an increasing level of understanding of the genocide happening, and also a decreasing strength or power of the pro-Israel narrative, even though they were able to bring several 100,000 people, pro-Israel demonstrations in Washington. You have a battling narrative of the Jewish Voice for Peace, and If Not Now, and Students for Justice in Palestine, which I think is gaining increasing traction. In fact, later this afternoon, I'm going to a Palestine Solidarity protest And tomorrow in Seattle here, there will be a Jewish Voice for Peace, and if not now, protest as well. And the point there is to show that American Jews are not a monolith, and that they are not accepting the narrative of the Jewish communal leadership and the Israel lobby organizations, which are standing in lockstep with Israel. And they're showing, I think that is proven, the power of what these two organizations are doing is proven by the fact that we gained another member of Congress, Jamie Raskin, who himself is Jewish, who has called for a ceasefire in Gaza and decried the civilian toll that's being taken. And we're now in the low 20s in terms of members of Congress who have done that. And another thing that's really important is that Jewish Voice for Peace, and if not now, closed all the entrances by sit-in outside of the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee. There were 10 or 15 members of Congress who were Democrats inside the building. The police called a lockdown because they were frightened that this would be another insurrection type activity, even though the demonstrators were totally peaceful. And the police used pepper spray on these Jewish protesters, and they carried them hogtied to arrest them. So I think that members of Congress are being made to feel that they're going to pay a price politically for their remaining in lockstep with Israel.
But let's talk about this. We're talking about these. Let's contrast actually that with last week's March for Israel. From what I've read, from what I saw, not grassroots, a pay-to-attend event where travel expenses and $250 were given to each, or at least to the students, mostly the young people, to each attendee. It also highlighted extreme right-wing Zionist supporters like Pastor John Hagee. He's on record as saying that God allowed the Holocaust so that Jews could return to Israel. Not good optics for Israel, do you think?
Well, the Israel on Campus Coalition was the one that paid these students to come to the rally, and that indicates that they were afraid that they couldn't get a youth contingent to the rally. And I want to go back to the Pew surveys, which show that Jewish youth are the most alienated from Israel. And so the way in which they have to entice Jewish young people and college students is by paying them to join this rally. And we should talk about the Israel on Campus Coalition and the work that they do on campus, because they not only pay students to attend these rallies, but they have informants, students that they recruit to spy on Jewish and Palestinian or pro-Palestinian groups on campus, like the ones I mentioned, JVP, and if not now, and Students for Justice in Palestine. And they take video and photographs of students. They then send all of this surveillance data back to AIPAC or the Israel on Campus Coalition. And they, in turn, according to the Nation article that just came out yesterday, send that material back to Israeli ministries. So you, in effect, have the Israeli government, through the Israel on Campus Coalition and AIPAC, spying on these students. And then that information is used to dox these students. And we have them doxed with trucks traveling around the campus with their faces plastered on the trucks, calling them terrorists, giving their home addresses, and giving their social media accounts, making that public, and hoping that they can intimidate and frighten them and cost them their careers as they transition from college into the workplace. So this is a very frightening campaign of intimidation that is paid for with millions of dollars in contributions from pro-Israel Jewish family foundations. One is called the Schusterman Family Foundation, and they contributed $8 million over a 6-year period to fund this kind of attacks on Jewish and Palestinian students.
Well, there is a generational shift against supporting Israel. Students and the younger generation on TikTok, for example, are educating themselves about the Israeli occupation and are speaking out. Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of ADL, was recording on a telephone call, stating that the threat to Israel was no longer left versus right, but generational. Do you think this shift has amplified the momentum of protests that are occurring worldwide?
Absolutely. I think that, as I said earlier, American Jews are increasingly opposed to not only what's going on in Gaza, but just in general, the Israeli fascist government and the attacks on Palestinian villages, trying to burn down the village of Huwara, and killing Palestinian farmers in cold blood, killing livestock and felling entire orchards of Palestinians. So we have American Jews, as I said, gradually peeling away from Israel. And then we have the evangelical Zionist movement, which is the new sort of body or block of support for Israel. But even the young evangelicals, as shown by polls, are themselves peeling away from Israel. So the more that Israel engages in this sort of genocide and this ethnic cleansing, both in Gaza and the West Bank, the less support it is getting. And despite all this, unfortunately, we have the U.S. government and President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken remaining in lockstep with Israel. And that is increasingly cutting into support for Biden. He lost 11 points of his approval rating in the last month, mainly because of lockstep support for Israel. And his support in the Arab American community went from 49% to 17%.
I think that's even, I think that's even exaggerated, the 17%, especially in Michigan, where if he's not going to win Michigan, he's not going to win. Period.
Right, because it's one of the battleground states that he really has to carry. Some of those Midwestern states he's got to carry, otherwise he can't win. And he has a very tough election against Trump, in spite of all of the legal problems that Trump is facing. Trump is beating him in the polls right now. So I don't think he can afford to lose the support that he's willing to lose. So I'm not sure what the political calculation here is, because it's hurting him very badly. And that's to be expected. It's almost like these people in the government are not aware, or they're unwilling to deal with the fact that the American people are increasingly opposed to what's going on in Gaza. And the price that these politicians are going to have to pay in the 2024 election, you've got the House under contention and the Senate under contention. And this could really mean a drubbing for Democrats, in spite of the fact, I should add, that the pro-Israel PACs that AIPAC runs, there are several other that are quasi-democratic PACs, are going to spend tens of millions of dollars. I would estimate maybe as much as $100 million to make sure that Democratic candidates running are pro-Israel, and spending tens of millions attacking candidates who are willing to be critical of Israel. And they're going to pay a price in the elections, I think, for what they're doing here in supporting Israel.
Yeah, well, definitely they're targeting the squad, and you're absolutely correct. They're designating $100 million. Even now, AOC and other progressive Democratic candidates are mentioning that. They're for the very first time, they're going after AIPAC. I mean, they're mentioning AIPAC by name, that they are trying to unseat them. And that's very troubling, that you have an organization which many would argue that should be registered as a foreign agent. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. In fact, I think that you could argue that the Israeli government is coordinating with AIPAC and these organizations, and the government approves of attacking these members of Congress. So again, you have a foreign government trying to influence American political the structure of the American government and interfering in our political process. And the members of the squad that you mentioned have been talking pointedly about how the $100 million that we're talking about is poisoning American democracy, and the money is an attempt to create a pro-Israel bloc in Congress and forcing members of Congress to stay in lockstep with Israel and letting them know that if they step out of line, they're going to pay a price. They're going to have a primary opponent that they wouldn't have. And that primary opponent is going to be richly endowed with campaign cash provided by these PACs. So I think it's very important that your listeners and all of us not only understand what's going on, but we try to counter the cash that's coming into these pro-Israel candidates by making sure that we support with our donations all of the members of the squad who are being primaried and who are facing tough races, because campaign cash is really the only coin of the realm that unfortunately determines the outcomes of elections. And we have to make sure that our side is got as much money to fight back as the other side.
We're seeing Twitter prohibit certain expressions, as I just was reading today, Elon Musk, expressions such as genocidal, from the river to the sea, and decolonization. Now that's apparently for Elon Musk is a bad word. While a group of Zionist Jewish celebrities and influencers had a call with, at the same time with TikTok, about increased anti-Semitism. Talk about spikes in anti-Semitism. Any hate crimes is serious, but there is this conflation of criticism of Israel and Zionism with anti-Semitism, when we know most of these anti-Semitic acts are perpetrated by white supremacists. What do these increased spikes consist of?
We've got this strange set of events happening with Twitter in particular, where white supremacists on Twitter post anti-Semitic and blatantly anti-Semitic content online. They face no pushback from Twitter. They're not disciplined and they're not suspended. And in fact, Elon Musk approves of their statements. And one particularly egregious anti-Semitic statement, he said, responded something like, "You speak the truth." And as a result of that, all of the major media companies have pulled all their advertising. And there's a huge amount of pushback, because Media Matters was the one who pointed out that these major advertisers are having neo-Nazi, white supremacist posts or tweets, and their ads are appearing right next to them, and they don't want anything to do with that. And so they've hurt Twitter in that way by pulling their ads. But I want to add that in accord with what you were just saying about Musk, he said that clauses said statements like "from the river to the sea." He's agreed with the ADL that statement is anti-Semitic. And you have the ADL, he's actually blaming the ADL for the advertisers leaving Twitter. And once Jonathan Greenblatt, the fellow that you mentioned, heard that the from the river to the sea was going to be eliminated on Twitter, and people whose accounts use that term were going to have their accounts suspended or deleted. The ADL, being attacked by Musk, released a statement praising him for doing that. And I want to talk just for a second about "from the river to the sea." That statement has existed for decades in the pro-Palestinian movement. And it does not mean genocide against the Jewish people or genocide against Israel, as is claimed by the ADL. It means that we want a state that a state of Palestine that is a democratic state for all its citizens, whether they be Jewish or whether they be Palestinian or Muslim or Christian or whatever. It's not a statement of genocide. It's not a statement that Jews in Israel are going to be thrown into the sea. In addition, it's important to point out that the slogan "from the river" is mirrored in the Likud and the early Jabotinsky Zionist movement, which said There are two banks to the Jordan, and both of them are ours. And that statement comes in the 1920s from Jabotinsky. So it's total hypocrisy to not acknowledge the territorial expansionist philosophy of Zionism from the earliest years of the movement, and now blaming the Palestinian movement for being anti-Semitic or promoting genocide. The other thing I want to point out is that because the term genocide is being used in Gaza and harming Israel's the way it's viewed in the world, the pro-Israel side has to start using the term genocide and saying that the people in Gaza and the people in Palestine want a genocide against Jews, even though there's no possible way that the Palestinians, even if they wanted to, which they don't, could engage in genocide. They don't have the mechanism, they don't have the power or anything related to that could commit a genocide. The real genocide that we have to focus on is happening in Gaza and happening in the West Bank. And that's important to keep in mind with all of this pro-Israel propaganda.
You know, it's kind of ironic when we talk about the phrase "from the river to the sea," which is basically what Palestinians are saying, that they want to live free or live equally in historic Palestine, because that's the borders of historic Palestine from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. When you see Benjamin Netanyahu, when he came to the United Nations, he was showing a map that included parts of Jordan and the Golan Heights and parts of Lebanon and so forth, of the map of a greater Israel. And no one said anything about, because what does that mean? Expansionism and genocide, because when you expand, you have to ethnically cleanse the land that you're going to be occupying, and no one said anything about that.
It's important to note that in the 1950s, Israeli military officers produced memos in which they talked about what they wanted the borders of Israel to be, and they included all of this southern Lebanon territory up to the Litani River. They included the West Bank. They included Gaza, as you said, the Golan. So this is the Greater Israel movement, which started in the 1970s, finally able to realize much of its agenda, territorial agenda. It hasn't yet gotten southern Lebanon because Hezbollah is standing in the way, and but the Palestinians can't vote as much opposition as Hezbollah has been able to do. But Israel, let's talk about ethnic cleansing in Gaza. We haven't done that yet. Israel has had two different proposals, one from the intelligence ministry and another from a think tank, saying that all of the Palestinians in Gaza should be ethnically cleansed and should be dumped either in the Sinai desert with tents. One of the reports is willing to give them at least tents in the Sinai after they're expelled. And another said that the 2.5 million Gazans should be brought to the outskirts of Cairo and put in new housing that would be built for them. So we have, in addition, the Israeli government itself officially has gone to 6 different states and said, would you be willing to have us expel several 100,000 Palestinians? And they said no, they poured cold water on it. But in spite of that, Israel does whatever it wants. It asks for permission. When it doesn't get permission, it does whatever it wants. So you have the U.S. government saying that we do not support cutting into the territory of Gaza, creating a new buffer zone, which is what Israel has done. We do not support Israel occupying Gaza after the war is over. In spite of that, Israel has totally erased everything in northern Gaza. 20% of Gaza is now completely devoid of houses and farmland, and nobody can live in that buffer zone. So Israel has gone ahead, in spite of the Americans' disapproval of ethnically cleansing northern Gaza, and it's basically doing whatever it wants. And the nations of the world and global entities have not stood up against this, and Israel is only taking advantage of their unwillingness to act.
There is of course, major scrutiny of pro-Palestinians, whether especially targeting young people, students in particular, young Jewish Americans, students now are being called because they speak against the genocide. They're labeled as Hamas supporters or terrorists. Jewish students are now being targeted, and before they used to use the label self-hating Jew, but now they're saying that they are not Jewish. Even they're doubting that, they're saying that they are fake Jews. I've seen several testimonies as such, but there is no sanctions or scrutiny when it comes to the pro-Israel or pro-Zionist lobby. For example, you have Marsh Blackburn, the U.S. Senator from Tennessee, who called for all Palestinians to be eliminated. And then just recently, the deputy speaker of the Israeli Knesset or parliament said that, burn Gaza. And there is no sanctions, no criticism in the media, hardly any reporting on these topics. What do you think is happening?
Well, we have genocidal comments coming regularly from members of the Knesset and even ministers in the government. One minister called for dropping an atom bomb on Gaza without realizing that it would also kill several million Israelis from the radiation and whatever. And so you have a strong movement in the Israeli fascist government in favor of ethnic cleansing, in favor of the genocide that's happening. But let's go back to the earlier part of your question, which is talking about what's going on in college campuses. You have three major universities on the East Coast: Brandeis, Georgetown, and Columbia, which is my alma mater. They have banned two major organizations, Jewish Voice for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine. They banned them, claiming that they explicitly support Hamas terrorism. And that is absolutely ludicrous. What they don't like is these students have been willing to go on campus and demonstrate publicly, and that the donors to the university have publicly said, we are going to stop giving to this university if it continues to allow this sort of student activism. And that's why they've violated academic freedom values, and they violated the First Amendment, which entitles people to speak out on political issues, including student groups on campus. So we see this increasing backlash by billionaire pro-Israel Jews who are funding the Israel on Campus Coalition, who are funding the kinds of activities, the doxing that we were talking about. And we've got to fight back against that. There's going to be a lawsuit by the ACLU in Florida, because the governor of Florida said that he wanted to ban Students for Justice in Palestine at all Florida state universities. And now there's going to be a lawsuit against the state because as a public university, they cannot discriminate, they cannot stop people and take away their right to free speech. So this is the pro-Israel movement in the United States attempting to make people, students, pay a price. And so some students have lost jobs at law firms. One student has, in addition to losing a job at a law firm, she's been basically sacked as president of the student body. And that kind of activity is really intimidating and making students think twice about speaking out on Palestine. One student, a Jewish student, said that after hearing that there was spying going on inside these pro-Palestinian groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, it makes him realize that any student on campus that he talks to who's pro-Israel could be reporting anything he says back to AIPAC or Israel on Campus, and then going to the Israeli ministry. And so they, if they decided, for example, they wanted to visit Israel, they don't know if they'd be detained when they arrived in Israel because it's illegal to support the BDS movement, for example. And they could be detained, they could be deported if they are found to be supporting BDS. So there's this really backlash that violates American constitutional principles. And it is in trying to inject this pro-Israel ideology into American life. And hopefully we're able to fight back and resist.
Richard Silverstein, thank you for coming on Arab Talk.
Thank you, Jamal, for having me. Appreciate it.
That's the voice and the face of Richard Silverstein. He's the editor of Tikkun Olam, the blog. It's a very compelling interview that you did with him, Jamal. I mean, he's basically articulating the global turn against the Israeli so-called military engagement. It's because it is a genocide. But it appears, according to Richard, that the Israelis are losing the narrative battle globally right now.
Well, no one is believing the Israeli military, especially after they've been caught with so many lies, including just, and this is amazing, that they've been challenged now by BBC and by CNN, pointing out to either that they were basically giving them false information or unverified reports. And as I was talking with Richard, all these reporters they've had are embedded from CNN, Fox News, and the New York Times, and they are not allowed to speak to any Palestinians. Imagine you're going to the Shifa hospital and you're listening basically to reports coming from the Israeli military spokesperson. You're not allowed to talk to doctors. You're not allowed to talk to nurses. You're not allowed to talk to the people who are getting killed. And then they report on this totally just like guided, like with a leash around their necks to show them. And then we'll talk about, of course, why Israel is losing this PR and media war, which usually they just spend millions and millions of dollars on it, along with their surrogates right here in the United States. We'll give some examples how they got caught. So if you listen, if you catch somebody lying to you 3 times, just will you believe them the next time? I mean, usually you don't believe them after the first time, second time, third time, fourth time.
You don't believe them.
So we'll go with some of the stories that I'm sure some of our viewers and listeners have either watched on TV or on social media, listened to, of course, starting with the infamous calendar story where you got the spokesperson showing you a paper on the wall of a hospital and saying these are terrorist names. You know, there are only a minimum of 350 million people who can speak and read Arabic, and I'm not even going to count in other countries like Pakistan and Afghanistan and other countries and Iran that uses Arabic script. So, and very simple words, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, like so you could easily read it. And the guy is just like with a straight face telling people, these are the names of the Hamas members. He's pointing to it, written down with their shores on a daily show. Of course, you know, this video is still online. That's the funny thing. And then of course, the Israeli media, I mean the Israeli military media apparatus puts out that video claiming that it is unedited and unaltered and so forth. And then you have editors around the world who can run this video through software, Final Cut Pro, etc., and watch it. And they were pointing out to several edits.
Exactly.
And pointing out the seconds.
Exactly.
So they removed that claim. They edited again, taking out that claim that this was unedited. So this is just one of the stories. What other stories you remember, Jess?
Well,
I should ask you, what other lies you remember?
Well, I think the biggest lie so far is the so-called command and control center of Hamas underneath Al-Shifa Hospital. It's been 5 days, Jamal. And do you and I actually believe if there was a sophisticated control and command center in Shifa Hospital after 5 days, does anybody in the world believe that there would be compelling video evidence put forth by the Israeli media by now? But guess what they've shown? Absolutely nothing. It's been a complete disaster. This is the big lie. We think the Trump election story is the big lie. This is the big lie, Jamal.
They said they're working their way, and this is really funny because it's so many days have passed by. You could transport an entire Hollywood set
in 5 days
and put it right there and then say, here is the command center, and bring everything in. And I should just say, add to that whole story, because then with part of that video, just when they started showing you weapons that we see every day when there is a drug bust right here in the United States, or actually somebody commented that most Americans have an arsenal bigger than that. And then they showed you that they were transporting boxes. I mean, it's kind of funny, like of aid, like water and what have you. And obviously these were the boxes that they brought in these weapons. And then they have the audacity to claim that they were bringing in incubators, and President Biden repeats that.
I know.
They're bringing in incubators to the hospital, despite the fact that the hospital has incubators. They lack fuel.
Already.
They lack
Exactly.
fuel. They lack electricity for these. So they don't need incubators. But
they need fuel.
They need the fuel. So they go on with that lie. Oh, we brought incubators to help these children. And of course, we know a few days later, as you've mentioned in the intro, the premature kids, many of them ICU patients, have died. They've died.
That's right.
Because they don't have electricity to run these incubators. And we can go on and on about...
But Jamal, let's be real. Does anybody really believe the Israeli military? Does anyone believe Netanyahu? Does anybody really believe Biden anymore? The extent, the breadth, and the depth of the lies and the misinformation that's coming out is so bad, Jamal. Even the mainstream media here in the United States doesn't believe it. Even the mainstream media here doesn't believe it. That shows you the extent of the disinformation, the extent of the lies. And I'm sorry to keep going back to this. They base the entirety of the invasion of destroying civilian infrastructure in Gaza based on the idea of the command center under Shifa Hospital, a gross violation of international law, a crime against humanity, a war crime. And after 5 days, they have nothing. They have nothing. So I guess the message that we've been saying for decades here in our show, you cannot believe a single word that the Israeli military, the Israeli media, or the Israeli government ever say about anything.
Well, back to my conversation with Richard Silverstein, and that's the real prize, just is the utter shock. And of course, we talked about. I'm sure you heard the recording with the head of the ADL talking about how they're losing this control over the narrative. And they're shocked to see day in, day out, hundreds of thousands of people are demonstrating, and hundreds and thousands of people, despite of all the lies that they put out there, that beheadings of children, that was basically
never happened.
Debunked. And yesterday, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz published a report that what we were saying, and what one of the settlers who came under attack testified that Israeli helicopters were shooting at them and killing Israelis. Haaretz published a report yesterday now that they are investigating that there was indeed a helicopter that shot at Israeli civilians, and that explains. When they were showing those the footage of charred bodies, okay, that doesn't come because you have Hamas with an AK-47 or what have you. There were missiles that were shot at these buildings.
That's right.
Killing both Hamas members and killing Israeli families and killing babies. And this this has been confirmed yesterday by Haaretz. You know?
Well, Jamal, but Joe Biden is the one that he saw verification of the Hamas fighters doing this. It was a complete lie. It was a complete, unfettered, categorical lie coming from the President of the United States. And we've shown that multiple times. This Haaretz report, Jamal, is crucial. And I think our listeners obviously know that this is coming from This is coming from Israeli media. This is not even coming from Arab media or, kind of any other media source. This is coming from an Israeli newspaper making this claim, which is rather damning.
Lie after lie, and one after the other, they get debunked just, almost on a daily basis. I can go on and go on. They said they targeted a car with terrorists in Lebanon, and it emerged that vehicle had 3 little girls, their mother and grandmother. Only
That's right.
the mom survived the shelling. So every day you find something, but they're telling you it's not true. And then when you talk about President Biden just basically and sadly repeats what the Israeli or what Benjamin Netanyahu hands him to read. And that's the fact. This is the fact. Did you see, for example, the press conference where they asked I think the spokesperson for the State Department, lady at the State Department, where did they get their information? They said, yeah, these are American intelligence. And the reporter asked her, do we have boots on the ground? Do we have basically CIA operatives in Gaza?
That's right.
And she said, no.
That's right.
So how do you confirm reports when you don't have basically your own intelligence agencies operating in Gaza? And she doesn't want to say that we got them from wherever, the Mossad or Israeli, but then we say we have confirmed. How did you confirm this?
It's a big lie, Jamal. That's why I think this big lie is bigger than the Trump big lie. Because with the Trump big lie, all there was kind of the unfortunate consequences, to the attack on, January 6th and the democracy, and we're still recovering from that. This big lie, Jamal, is resulting in, close to 12,000 innocent men, women, and children in Gaza being slaughtered and murdered. Almost 5,000 Palestinian children being murdered. Malnutrition, dehydration, infectious disease outbreaks in Gaza, lack of fuel. I mean, this big lie is causing a war crime, and that's why this big lie, to me, is the big lie of the century. And it has taken this lie to allow our mainstream media here in the United States to confront the kind of outrageous reporting on the beginning part of the destruction and the genocide in Gaza, which they failed to report in an even-handed way. My question to you, do you think this is really going to change the landscape of the U.S. media bias just because they're confronting the lies of the Israeli military and the lies of the Israeli leadership? Do you think it's really going to change here?
Absolutely not. And
it won't.
And then 5 years from now, there'll be a discussion which basically happened after the war on Iraq. If you recall, during the war on Iraq, the media drank the Kool-Aid that Colin Powell presented them with at the UN Security Council, saying that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And we had also embedded journalists traveling with the U.S. troops and confirming that they were looking for weapons of mass destruction and so forth. And then you had media stations with American flags fluttering on the screen. And so they lost all sense of journalism, and they just took one side. And the media right here in the United States is taking similarly one side, with the exception of the few. And now, since the lies are coming out one after the other, as I keep repeating, maybe later on, after this is over, they'll start examining this. But then they'll go and repeat it in the next conflict and the next conflict.
That's right.
Because they never learn from their lessons. And the other thing I want to comment on just is also, like when you mentioned the word genocide, I said, no, there is no genocide. When you have Israeli leaders confirming that there is a genocide, or they are calling for a genocide, the latest of which is the deputy spokesperson, the deputy speaker of the Israeli Knesset, who basically said that he wants to burn Gaza. He says that. Let's burn Gaza.
And nuke it.
No, that's another one. Another one who says let's nuke it. But this one, that's the minister. I forgot what position in the ministry he has in the government. But anyway, he said nuking Gaza. And so you have every single day calls for genocide or cheering on the genocide. And sadly, every single congressman and congresswoman, senator, and so forth in this country who basically they issue press releases saying we're not going to stop the war.
Exactly.
Basically keep killing more children, keep killing more civilians. They are also part and parcel of this genocide.
Well, that's exactly right, Jamal. And actually, it gets even worse. You have the American Medical Association going on record as being silent. Doctors are being killed and murdered in Gaza. Nurses are being killed and murdered in Gaza. Hospitals are being destroyed. It's a complete attack on the healthcare infrastructure. And you would expect the American Medical Association would say, stop this attack on healthcare infrastructure. It's a war crime. I can tell you that hundreds of letters have been written to the AMA demanding that, and there has been radio silence coming from the largest medical association in the world, actually, is the AMA. Radio silence, which is basically giving cover to the Israeli military to kill doctors, to kill nurses, to allow patients to die at the hands of this genocidal attack by the Israeli military. So this will be on their conscience for the rest of their lives. We hear doctors in the United States, pro-Israel doctors, who are basically cheering on the fact that the healthcare infrastructure has been destroyed and that babies in the ICU at Shifa Hospital are dying because there's not enough fuel. They will have this moral stain on their souls, Jamal, for the rest of their lives.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you next week.